Jong was still awake, sitting to the back of the hut, surrounded by candles, moving in unison in a calm, meditative beat. His voice was harsh when he yelled out to Zuko, not even bothering to turn around. "I already agreed to teach the Avatar. Leave me alone." Zuko swallowed thickly, awkwardly. He shifted on his feet. The wood of the mask felt heavier now, somehow, and his heart swooped with the uneven sensation of hope and fear. Finally, after years, he was faced with someone that Uncle had trusted to help him way back then. It was like the last 3 years could be wiped clean. He was finally on the path he should have always been on. If he didn't mess it up. He was going to mess it up, wasn't he? No, he wasn't. He couldn't. He wouldn't let himself. I'm not here to talk about that. I heard that you're a really good Pai Sho player. The man straightened, entire body going tense as he whirled on Zuko. His eyes squinted suspiciously. "You are a fan of the game?" he asked, the tone neutral, searching. Zuko shrugged, heart beating an uneven tempo in his chest. "My uncle taught me to play. I'm not the best, but he showed me a trick or two." "There, old man. Was that vague and hinty enough for you?" Apparently it was, as the man cleared away some of the candles and pulled out a board and a small box out of the shadows. "I don't have my own pieces," Zuko admitted, and Jong paused for a moment before pulling out a second box. It was considered lucky to play with your own tiles, but most players kept a second set for guests. The tent was silent for a few moments as the pair set up the board for the start of the game. Zuko was relieved to see that Jong's spare set was complete, even with some of the more obscure tiles. The set in Zuko's hand was much nicer than one in Jong's. Where Zuko's tiles were sharp corners, pearly white, with brightly colored designs, Jong's tiles were slightly smoothed corners, and chipped and dull paint worn from years of use. It reminded him of Uncle's. "The guest has the first move," the deserter said, eyeing Zuko carefully. Zuko took several long, even breaths. He memorized his uncle's instructions that day on the beach, and repeated them to himself ad nauseum in the cave. He just had to make sure he didn't forget them now. Carefully, the boy pried the lotus flower tile out of the box and put it in the very center of the board. Jong continued to look at him steadily. His voice showed careful, no unsurprise when he spoke again. "I see you favor the White Lotus Gambit. Not many still favor the ancient ways." Zuko felt something in him relax at those words. Like he was a marionette that had been caught in too tight strings, was finally being dropped. His mouth was dry as he finished the quote. "But those who do can always find a friend." The firebending master eyed Zuko for a beat again. The man seemed to like just staring and looking and trying to seem intimidating. It worked, but Zuko would never admit it. Finally, the man silently laid his own piece onto the board. It was exactly where the boy was expecting it to go, and so he felt a rush of excitement that had him smiling as he hurriedly placed his own piece where it should go. The two players moved immediately after one another, their movements a mirror image of each other as a picture began to form on the Pai Sho table. Jong paused for a moment before placing his final tile. It is said that how a man plays Pai Sho reveals more of who he is than anything else. However, as this game is said to reveal the truth, it is considered very rude to hide your face as you play. I would appreciate it if you removed your mask. Zuko froze. He nearly forgotten that he was still dressed as the Blue Spirit. However, he found himself frozen at the thought of removing it. While he wore the mask, there was a degree of separation between him and who he was. He hadn't been Prince Zuko in so long. He'd been the Firebender, nameless for years, and then Zuko, random Fire Nation teenager for the weeks that followed. It had been hard, losing such a key part of his identity. However, he was finding it harder to think of picking it back up. Banished prince, cowardly disgrace to the throne, and disrespectful son. It didn't matter that his father was wrong. He was the one who'd been banished. He had no doubt that he would be recognized the instant the mask was removed, that Zhang would know, if he didn't already. Still, Uncle trusted this man, and Uncle never hurt him. If he didn't trust Uncle, if he didn't know what to do, didn't know where he was going or what he was trying to do, it was either trust Zhang now, or give up. And he wouldn't give up without a fight. With jerky, fast movements before he could change his mind, Zuko tore off the mask. He waited with bated breath for what he wasn't sure. For the man to bow as royalty was due, for him to angrily kick Zuko out, for him to say something. However, the elder firebender just nodded, not a hint of surprise on his face, and played his final piece. Zuko quickly completed the image, smiling as the simple image of a lotus flower was now filling the board. Zhang nodded. The white lotus opens wide to those who know her secrets. You have certainly waited longer than we expected to seek the lotus. The Grand Master was growing concerned. I didn't intend to. I was captured by a band of Earth Kingdom rebels. While I was still wounded, I was able to hide my identity from them, but he pushed back the long black sleeve of his robe to reveal the scarring that littered his right wrist, the calluses that had formed where the manacle had rubbed his skin raw. I wasn't able to escape until the Avatar's friend found me. I see. They kept me alive because they wanted to practice fighting a firebender, but they kept me in a cave, chained to the wall. Zhang took in a sharp breath. The whole time? Yeah, Zuko said, naturally raspy voice sounding even harsher. You're bending. Suddenly, Zuko wanted nothing more than spill every detail of the torture of the dark, cold, stifling place, to speak about losing his firebending to someone who could actually understand what it meant. I started suffering from sun deprivation about a year in, maybe a little over. It was hard to tell how much time had passed. I didn't lose it completely until a few months later. I haven't been able to bend in almost 2 years. His voice had grown soft at the end, almost ashamed. Zhang simply stared at the boy evenly. When he spoke, his voice was even rougher than it had been. You are strong to have survived that. Most firebenders do not live past the day of loss. I almost didn't, Zuko admitted. Do you know if I can be reversed? The man leaned back, face folded in consideration before he spoke, voice apologetic. I have not heard many stories of a sun deprivation where their victim was able to regain their bending. However, the man added just as Zuko was beginning to fall into despair, there are not many situations I've heard of where the bender survived the experience. As I said, most die on the day of the initial loss, and those who do survive are often eventually killed by their captors, one way or another. Sun deprivation is a very specific and rare kind of torture. It happens rarely, and is survived even more so. It happens rarely, and is survived even less so. You survived, so do not lose hope. How is your chi? It's been more active now that I can feel the sun more, but not what it used to be. But it's getting stronger. I can't create my own flame yet, but I can feel existing flames sometimes. I can get a proper fire started much faster than Katara, and I don't know if I'm actually controlling it. I know that by the time it's a proper fire, it doesn't listen to me, but sometimes I feel like the kindling responds. But I don't actually have a lot of time to practice when we need the fire for food. I'm still not sure how comfortable they are with me yet. I don't want to risk it. Zhang nodded, and with a wave of his hand extinguished the candle, but one. Do you remember how to properly meditate? Match the flame to your breath. A single candle's flame should respond to the smallest of chi. Zuko resisted the urge to say that he doubted he could ever forget how to properly meditate. Not after how he used it to cut through the long, monotonous hours stuck in the cave. Instead, he simply folded himself into a proper meditation pose and prepared himself mentally to potentially fail as a taller exercise. He closed his eyes and took even, measured deep breaths. He reached out his chi, feeling the warmth and the life of the dancing flame. Within a few breaths, he felt the warmth of his chi and the warmth of the fire become one. He kept his eyes closed for several long seconds, terror running through him as he thought that the candle flame was as wild and directionless as it always had been. However, when he finally stuffed that fear into a box and forced his eyes open, the small candle flame was moving in sync with his breath. The relief that shot through him in that moment was like a physical blow. He could firebend, a little at least. It wasn't lost. He wasn't lost. The flame flickered as his relief overshadowed him, but Zuko quickly wrestled the flame back under control. It was amazing to realize that he could just do that. It felt better, more powerful and more heady than the day he learned his first and only advanced kata. Zhang was smiling down at the candle as well. See if you can fan this flame. Get it as large as you can and let me know when you can no longer control it. He sent Zuko a hard stare. I am assured that I don't need to warn you not to do this on your own, or any time there is not another firebender present. Or the waterbender, I suppose. Someone who can bank or control the flames. Zuko shook his head. No, I know full well how destructive fire can be. He didn't look away from the candle, but he could feel the deserter's gaze on his scar, like it was a physical thing. Zhang didn't mention it, though. Instead, he simply grunted. Then I will spare you the lecture, for now. Zuko snorted. Save it for Aang. He may need the lesson drilled in a few times. He's a good kid, but he's overexcitable. Zhang grunted, but said nothing. Zuko stoked the fire higher and higher, until it was a good half-foot higher than the short candle, at which point the single lick of flame separated into multiple tails. I lost it, he admitted, and watched as with a single breath the elder firebender brought it back down to more organic flame size. The man nodded. Now see if you can take the flame into your own hand. Zuko nodded and brought his hand to the candle. He linked his chi to the flame once more and called to it, guiding the tame fire to the tip of one of his fingers. It followed eagerly, but removed from the original flame source, it lasted only a moment before it sputtered and dissolved into smoke. A pang of pain shot through the teen's heart as the fire died, but Zhang seemed pleased. You were able to call the flames to you. You were able to control it well. I should say your firebending currently at par with the average 5-year-old firebender. Do not think that this is a disparaging comment on your abilities, rather on your chi level. If you were previously unable to firebend at all, this means that your chi energies are regenerating. In time, as possible, you will gain all of your abilities. It is easily possible that you will recharge at a certain point and go no further. There isn't enough known about sun deprivation survivors for us to be certain. In either case, it can only help to work the chi path as much as possible to get them used to being used again. I'll give you some beginner activities to work through as I train the Avatar on the proper breathing. Zuko bowed, folding himself prostrate on the ground in a move he hadn't made since the Agni Kai. Thank you, Sifu. You are welcome, Prince Zuko. The teen rose and started to the door. Even the small bit of firebending he'd done was making him exhausted, in the proud, self-satisfied way. As he went to the door, Zhang spoke up once more. You know there is an old joke that the court gospel travel faster than the military orders. An exaggeration, of course, though not much of one when the news is especially juicy. I have many men who have come to me after defecting, as I am the only commanding officer to survive doing so. Some of them live in that village, don't they? For the first time that night, the master looked surprised. Under new names. How did you know? Zuko snorted. Everything in that town is a tiny bit of treason. Of course. Well, you may not have noticed during the festival due to the mask, but that town is mainly filled with uncommonly young men and women. 3 years ago, they would have been new recruits. Zuko's breath caught. Did Did they all come from the same division? They did. There was a lump in Zuko's throat, difficult to breathe around and impossible to force words through. In the end, he didn't even try. He simply bowed to the man once more as Zhang pulled out a brush and a piece of parchment. Then he fled the hut. If he had to lift his mask to wipe his eyes as he made his way back to their hut, well, there was no one's business and no one could prove anything. When Sokka woke, Zuko was gone. Not entirely unusual, considering the firebender woke up at the crack of way too early every day. But he could see through the small hut window that it was still dark out. Something was wrong. He would like to believe that it was the instincts, that sense of wrongness, that had woken him. Unfortunately, he knew for a fact he had actually just drank too much on the fair to get the burn of the fireflies out of his mouth. Now, did this hut have a bathroom, or... The hut did not have a bathroom. Luckily, the woods had plenty of trees. Though Sokka didn't like that Zuko wasn't back by the time he slipped back into their guest quarters. Katara and Aang were still undisturbed, sleeping heavily. But Sokka no longer felt tired. No, he was too keyed up. Old anxieties and fears were surfacing. Like old, like cave times old. Now he wasn't afraid of Zuko being evil or anything, not anymore, it was just... Zuko hadn't really had a chance to be around Fire Nation people since they broke him out. Not ones that weren't soldiers or avatar hunters, who just shot fire first and asked questions never. Well, presumably they would ask questions after capturing them, but based on Zuko's reaction to the wanted poster, those questions wouldn't have been positive. Well, this was the first time Zuko had been around friendly fire in years. And they were friends. Zuko knew that. He trusted him. But Zuko always went quiet when they talked about the evils of the Fire Nation. He wouldn't look anyone in the eye for hours if they started talking about how Aang was going to fight the Fire Lord. Sometimes he actually left. Katara had confronted him about that one, and they got him to agree that the war was wrong and needed to be stopped. But he clammed up right after. He yelled something about how the situation was too difficult for peasants like you to understand, and stormed off. So yeah, he wasn't worried, it was just... Here he was, their firebending friend, who was never super outspoken on his opinions of the war, surrounded by other Fire Nation soldiers, some of whom had pointed spears at them just a few hours ago, and he disappeared. After they had fallen asleep. He probably waited until after they fell asleep. Sokka was just a little concerned. He elected to eschew his sleeping bag completely, instead choosing to sit cross-legged on the hut floor, boomerang sheath but near at hand. He rummaged in his bag in the light of the smoldering fireplace that kept the hut comfortably warm. After a while, he came across a small wreath of thin material. A scarf he had brought as a piece of retail therapy at the fortune-teller's volcano village. It had been dirt cheap, too. The vendor said that Madame Wu had predicted that someone would need it. What a load of crap. It had just been sitting in his bag the whole time. He didn't even like the pattern. He thought he would. It was blue and white swirled together in a very water-tribey way. However, it was too close while being too different. Sure, the colors were good, but the pattern wasn't quite as flowy as proper water-tribe fashion. It just made him miss home even more. So at the bottom of the bag it had gone. He wondered if it was a Fire Nation design. In retrospect, it did kind of resemble Zuko's mask. As soon as the thought flit into his mind, the door of the hut slid open and Zuko slid in. "Hey, man," Sokka said, softly to keep from waking the others. "Where you been?" Trying for casual, non-confrontational so that Zuko didn't wake the others up. The other teen tensed, and sighed and mirrored Sokka's sitting position. He took off his mask and cricked his neck. He was so casual, so calm, that Sokka immediately felt like the worst friend ever for distrusting him. Zuko couldn't lie to save his life, literally. If he had been doing anything suspicious, he would have been tenser than a bowstring. "I went to speak with Master Zhang about my firebending." Sokka blinked. Oh yeah, they had mentioned that back in the clearing, hadn't they? All that drama with the spear dudes and Zhang's refusal, and Avatar Roku kind of overshadowed it, though. Wow, Sokka really was the worst friend ever. To make up for it, he leaned forward eagerly. "And what happened?" Zuko's golden eyes seemed even brighter than usual, despite how the low light in the room was the pile of coals behind Sokka. I firebent. I was able to control a candle. It's not much. It's like I'm a toddler again, but Sokka, I firebent. I could feel the flames. It was amazing. Like I spent months as a zombie or a ghost, and I'm finally coming back to life. Sokka would never get that feeling. He would never have it, never feel it himself, never even understand it. Not like Zuko, Katara, or Aang. He wasn't a bender, would never really know what it meant to be one. This was not the time for petty jealousy, though. Not when he was already 0 for 2 for being a terrible friend tonight. That's amazing, man. Congratulations. He jumped up and gave the firebender a firm hug. As usual, Zuko went tense and still refused to relax or reciprocate. Okay. At first I thought it was a Fire Nation thing, but I saw 100 hugs at this festival thing, so no more excuses. No more excuses not to get in on this. What? Of course it's not a Fire Nation thing. How can an entire nation be against hugs? It's just more of a family thing. Your family didn't hug. This explained so much. No, well, my uncle used to, before, but then after. Oh, and my mom did, but you know. Sokka most definitely did not know, considering Zuko never talked about his life, but he did know about mothers who weren't there to give hugs anymore. Who hadn't been for a long time. Yeah, I know. Well, we will have to introduce you to it. It's a very important life skill. Zuko snorted, more calm than Sokka had ever seen him, eyes staring back at the fire pit even now, and then as though itching to bend some more. Sokka almost asked him to, but knew that was a hungry way. But knew that with the hungry way Zuko was staring at the flames, if he could bend, then he would be. So instead, he let out an exaggerated yawn. Well, I'm hitting the sleeping bag. You might want to, too, considering your freaky firebendingness. We'll be waking you up in, 2 hours. Fine, Zuko said with a familiar scowl, snatching his mask off the ground and pinning it over his face. Sokka frowned. We need to get you one of those half-mast things, like Ch3 had at the festival. Zuko snorted. That covers the wrong half. Oops. Suddenly idea sparked, and Sokka pulled out the scarf again, and made quick work of carving out a pair of eye holes. Here, try this. It should be a little bit more comfortable. Zuko took it hesitantly, still unsure with accepting anything from them, but he tried it around his head smartly, running his fingers over the fabric and relaxing slightly when he found it covered the entire scar. Thanks, he said reluctantly as he pulled out his blanket. I really needed that. This proved nothing, and fortune-telling was fake. Sokka shook his head and plopped down on his own bedroll, facing Katara. Her hands were clenched into fists, and her eyes were open and teary. She heard that then. The part about the hugs and the mom. They locked eyes, and Sokka could watch as they hardened with determination. That mama saber-toothed moose lion had awoken. Finally.